The Dominion never expected Earth to fight back, not truly. They saw humanity as another minor species in the grand hierarchy of the galaxy, tolerated but insignificant, allowed to exist at the fringes because they were too weak to challenge real power. And when the High Executor Valon ordered the public execution of a human child on Zadris 4, he did it with a smirk, fully believing his message would be received with submission. Humanity would weep. Humanity would bow. And then humanity would forget. But what Valon never understood, what the entire Dominion failed to grasp, was that humanity does not forget. The moment Alara Voss' death was broadcast across the stars, Earth went silent. No threats. No outrage. No diplomatic protests. Just silence. And in that silence, the Dominion should have felt fear, should have recognized the absence of noise as the whisper of a storm that had already begun. Because even as the Dominion paraded their cruelty, as Valon's soldiers marched past her lifeless body as a symbol of dominion over a lesser species, something deeper than revenge took root in the soul of mankind. It was not just the death of a child, it was the murder of an idea. The idea that Earth could coexist with the Dominion, that peace was possible, that humanity was just another cog in the galactic order. That idea died with Alara Voss. And something else was born in its place. Dorian Graves watched the footage one last time, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. The playback was grainy, the Dominion's signature red-hued broadcast overlay giving the scene an artificial theatricality. Alara knelt, her small hands trembling as she clutched at the loose fabric of her dress. No screams. No cries for mercy. Just the uncomprehending horror of a child who still believed someone would stop this, that the world was not so cruel. Then the blade came down, swift and precise, separating innocence from existence in an instant. Graves turned away from the screen, swallowing the burning bile that rose in his throat. How long? His voice was steady, cold. Admiral Rains, standing stiff beside him, exhaled through her nose. 12 hours until full deployment. Make it 6, he said. That will mean skipping final calibrations for the Lazarus Initiative, Rains warned. I don't care. She didn't argue. They both knew there was no turning back. Across the Sol system, humanity's war machine stirred, awakened from its slumber not by conquest, not by greed, but by a single, unforgivable act. It was not just the fleets mobilizing, not just the soldiers donning armor and calibrating weapons. It was the engineers who worked with red-rimmed eyes, loading payloads into weapons the Dominion had never seen before. It was the technicians whispering final commands into AI constructs designed for one purpose only, eradication. It was the civilians who stood in silence outside government buildings, not protesting, not pleading, just waiting, listening, watching, their faces set in grim understanding. Earth had been patient for too long. The Dominion would learn that patience was not the same as weakness. The first strike came without warning. The Dominion's border worlds, fortified and patrolled for centuries, had never faced an enemy that fought like this. Human stealth ships, built with dark matter folding tech the Dominion had arrogantly dismissed as theoretical, bypassed planetary defenses entirely. They did not engage in battle. They did not announce their arrival. They simply arrived, and when they did, entire planets fell silent. Communications cut. Power grids collapsed. And then, in the dead stillness, the killing began. Automated drones rained from the sky like falling stars, their nanite payloads dissolving Dominion infrastructure within minutes. AI warforms, coated with the cold, brutal efficiency of a species that had spent centuries perfecting war even in peacetime, moved through cities like ghosts, wiping out military strongholds, erasing government facilities. And in the places where flesh still resisted, where the Dominion soldiers scrambled to make sense of the horror unfolding around them, human operatives, those known only as the ghosts of vengeance, made their presence known in the final moments of their enemies' lives. Valon watched the reports come in, his fingers tightening around the armrest of his throne. This was impossible. This was unthinkable. Humanity had no empire, no war fleets to match the Dominion. And yet, entire worlds had gone dark within hours. Entire regiments lost without a single distress signal. This was not resistance. This was extermination. "The humans have gone mad," one of his warlords hissed, pacing before the war table in the Dominion's high chamber. "They're fighting like animals. No diplomacy, no demands. Just slaughter." Vaylon's golden eyes burned with something not quite fear, not quite anger. "Then we remind them who we are." The Dominion fleets moved, the full force of their Galactic Empire surging toward the contested front. But by the time they arrived, there was nothing left to reclaim. The planets they had lost were not occupied. There were no human forces planting flags, no Earth banners waving in conquest. There was only fire. The Dominion world still burned, their surfaces charred and broken, the great spires of their cities collapsed into ruin. The air was thick with the scent of melted steel and burnt flesh. And in the wreckage, left carved into the blackened earth, one message repeated over and over, branded into the land itself: "Never again." Graves stood on the bridge of the Sovereign's wrath, watching the destruction unfold. This was only the beginning. The Dominion had waged wars before, but they had never fought a war of extinction. That was what this was. Earth would not stop. Earth would not negotiate. The Dominion had taken one of theirs. Now Earth would take everything. Graves watched the flames rise from the wreckage of another Dominion city, the sky above it thick with smoke, the ground below it littered with bodies. There were no civilians left. The Dominion had evacuated them when they realized what was coming, when they saw the cold, calculated precision with which humanity was dismantling them. The war was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. This wasn't a fight for survival, nor a conquest. This was a reckoning. The Dominion had believed itself untouchable, had ruled for centuries by crushing lesser civilizations before they could become threats. They had built their empire on arrogance, on the certainty that they were the pinnacle of power. But now, for the first time, they were facing something they could not comprehend. Humanity did not play by their rules. Humanity did not seek negotiations. Humanity did not want their empire. Humanity wanted their destruction. The comms crackled to life, Rain's voice sharp and steady. "Graves, we have confirmation. Executor Vaylon is making a stand at Zypherian Prime. He's consolidating his remaining fleets. They're calling it the last stand of the Dominion." Graves exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing as he processed the information. Vaylon wasn't retreating. That meant one thing: he still thought he had a chance. "Send a transmission to the fleet. I want every warship in formation within the next 4 hours." There was a brief pause before Rains responded, a note of something almost hesitant in her voice. "Are you sure? We've already crippled them. The Dominion is collapsing. Their vassal states are abandoning them. If we push any further," Graves cut her off. "If we stop now, if we leave them with anything, they'll rebuild. Maybe not today. Maybe not in 10 years. But eventually, someone like Vaylon will rise again, and the first thing they'll do is remind the galaxy why they once ruled it. We don't leave embers. We burn everything." The line went dead. Rains knew better than to argue. She had been there when the first Dominion warships fired on unarmed human colonies, had seen the lifeless bodies floating in the void, children and civilians massacred without hesitation. There was no moral high ground in this war. There was no stopping halfway. There was only an ending, and humanity would be the one to right it. The fleet moved in silence, thousands of warships aligning in perfect synchronization, a mechanical behemoth that blotted out the stars as it prepared to descend upon Zypherian Prime. The Dominion's last stronghold, their most fortified world, their seat of power for centuries. And in a matter of hours, it would become their grave. Vaylon stood on the bridge of his flagship, fists clenched, his cybernetic eyes scanning the data feeds flooding his command console. The reports were staggering. The humans had not just outmaneuvered them. They had outthought them. They had predicted every move, countered every strategy, anticipated every defense. It was not just brute force, it was something far worse. They were methodical. Relentless. The Dominion had fought hundreds of wars, had faced rebellions, uprisings, rival empires. But never had they faced an enemy that did not seek to conquer, that did not seek power or territory. The humans wanted nothing. Nothing but vengeance. And against an enemy like that, there was no victory. A warlord at his side spoke, voice laced with barely contained panic. "Executor, we must leave. We can still escape, regroup. If we abandon Zypharian, we can." Valon's fist lashed out, striking the warlord across the jaw, sending him sprawling to the floor. "Coward." His voice was venomous, his fury barely restrained. "This is our empire. Our birthright. We do not run." He turned back to the viewport, to the endless blackness of space, where the human fleet would soon arrive. He would not run. He would make them bleed. Even if it was the last thing he did. The first wave of human warships broke into Zypharian's orbit, deploying AI-controlled bombardment drones that blanketed the atmosphere in an unrelenting storm of energy blasts. The planetary shields held, at first. Then came the second wave. Not ships, not missiles. Something worse. Self-replicating swarms of nanite warheads, engineered to bypass conventional energy defenses, slipping through microscopic vulnerabilities in the shield matrix before detonating in a cascading chain reaction. The shield collapsed in seconds. Valon's forces opened fire, the Dominion's remaining fleet launching everything they had, desperately trying to hold the line. Human ships dodged and weaved, their AI-driven tactical systems predicting Dominion attack patterns before they could be executed. The battle was not a battle. It was an execution. Dominion warships detonated like dying stars, their crews screaming into the void as human warforms tore through them without hesitation, without pause. And then, through the chaos, came the final strike. The Sovereign's wrath cut through the remnants of the Dominion fleet like a blade through flesh, Graves at its helm, his expression devoid of anything resembling mercy. The ship drove forward, past the carnage, heading straight for Zypharian itself. This was not just about ending the war. This was about making a statement. The ship's AI engaged planetary bombardment protocols, targeting Zypharian's capital, its command centers, its last strongholds. And then, the final order. Burn it. The city fell beneath fire and ash, the ground splitting apart as explosive shockwaves tore through its foundation. The Dominion's High Council chambers collapsed, its rulers buried beneath the rubble of the empire they had built on blood. The last of the Dominion warlords fell, their cries lost in the inferno. And at the heart of it all, Valon stood atop the ruins of his throne, watching as his world crumbled around him. He did not beg. He did not plead. He simply stared, silent, as the sky itself seemed to shatter. Graves' voice echoed across the Dominion's emergency broadcast channels, a final message that would be heard across every remaining system, every vassal state, every survivor of what had once been an empire. "You killed one of ours. We erased you from history. Let this be the last time anyone thinks humanity is weak." The transmission cut. The last of the Dominion's resistance fell. Zypharian burned. The war was over. There were no cheers. No celebrations. Only silence. The fleet turned away, leaving nothing behind but ruin. Earth did not claim the remnants of the Dominion. They did not build an empire of their own. They had never wanted one. They only wanted justice. And now, they had it. The name Alara Voss would never be forgotten. The Dominion would never rise again. And the galaxy, watching from the shadows, would remember this day forever. Humanity had spoken. And the message was clear. Never again. The flames had barely begun to die when the transmissions started flooding in. Across the collapsing Dominion, scattered fleets and abandoned colonies screamed for aid, desperate for orders that would never come. The once mighty empire was crumbling, its leaders dead, its warlords either executed or in hiding. What remained of their armada drifted through the void in broken, burning wreckage. But the war was not over. Not yet. Humanity did not leave loose ends. Graves stood aboard the Sovereign's Wrath, his eyes locked on the holographic map of the Dominion's last remaining territories. Pockets of resistance still held out, clusters of military stations, deep space command posts, and hidden strongholds. They were no longer a threat to Earth, but that wasn't the point. The galaxy was watching. Every species that had cowered under Dominion rule, every empire that had looked upon humanity with indifference, every warlord waiting to see if Earth would stop now that its vengeance had been delivered. They were waiting to see if humanity had limits. Graves would make sure they understood the truth. "Patch me through to all remaining Dominion outposts," he ordered, his voice a steady, unwavering blade. The comms officer hesitated for only a second before the transmission was broadcast across every surviving Dominion channel. "This is Commander Dorian Graves of the United Earth War Council. The Dominion is dead. Its leaders are gone, its empire reduced to ashes. You have one chance. Surrender immediately, or we will hunt you down and erase what remains of you. There will be no negotiations. No mercy. You know what we are capable of. Do not test us." There was silence. Then, across a dozen fractured systems, Dominion commanders began transmitting their surrenders. Some begged for leniency, some cursed humanity's name, others simply cut the feed and prepared to die fighting. It made no difference. The war machine moved forward. One by one, the last strongholds fell. Automated warships, cold and emotionless, swept through their defenses like a storm, their AI minds calculating destruction with ruthless efficiency. The Dominion's once loyal vassal species either watched in horror or turned on their former masters, desperate to align themselves with the new reality. Human ground forces deployed were necessary, though most of the killing had already been done from orbit. Dominion commanders who refused to surrender were annihilated without hesitation. The galaxy had never seen a campaign fought like this before. This was not an invasion. There were no territories claimed, no flags planted. Earth did not want an empire. Earth wanted closure. Graves watched as the last of the Dominion warships detonated above what had once been a thriving military world. He had stopped keeping count of how many planets they had glassed, how many fleets they had reduced to nothing. The numbers didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was making sure it never happened again. The comms crackled with an incoming transmission. Rain's voice came through, sharp, but quieter than usual. "We have intercepted a distress signal from an unidentified Dominion station in deep space. It's not military. It looks like a civilian refugee transport." There was a pause. "It's full of children." Graves' jaw tightened. He had known this moment would come. War was clean in theory. You crushed the enemy, you made sure they couldn't strike back, and you moved on. But war was never just soldiers and battlefields. The Dominion had been ruthless, but their people, most of them, had simply lived under it, as powerless against their leaders as humanity had been before Alara's execution. Graves had never cared for excuses. The Dominion had made their choice the moment they killed a human child and broadcast it for the galaxy to see. And now, with their own children crying for help in the dark void, the weight of that choice was coming back to them. He exhaled slowly, his fingers pressing into the console as the weight of the moment settled onto his shoulders. "Is there any indication they were involved in military operations?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Negative," Rains replied. "They're unarmed. Mostly non-combatants. We're picking up thousands of life signs, many of them juveniles. The oldest Dominion records identify this as a civilian emergency shelter. They're pleading for mercy." Mercy. The word felt foreign now, an alien concept buried beneath the ruins of every world they had burned. Graves turned toward the bridge viewport, looking out at the endless field of wreckage drifting through space. How many had died screaming? How many had watched their homeworlds crumble beneath Earth's retribution? And yet here, now, the enemy's weakest, their most helpless, called for something humanity had denied them at every turn. The crew remained silent, waiting for his command. He could feel the weight of their unspoken thoughts, the tension thick enough to choke on. They had all seen what the Dominion had done. They had all lost something. And yet they had all been human, once. His hands curled into fists at his sides, his voice a quiet, measured thing when he finally spoke. "We let them go." Rain's breath hitched, the silence stretching before she responded. "Are you sure?" "We let them go," Graves repeated. "We are not them." The order was relayed. The fleet disengaged. The Dominion refugee ship drifted on, untouched, vanishing into the void as humanity turned its back on the last remnants of its greatest enemy. In the coming years, there would be arguments, accusations. Some would call it weakness, others pragmatism. Historians would debate the significance of the moment, whether it was an act of mercy or simply a decision made to end a war that had already reached its conclusion. But the truth was simpler. Humanity had already won. There was nothing left to destroy. The Dominion was gone. Illaravas's name would never be forgotten. And the galaxy would never again question the cost of harming Earth. As the fleet turned for home, Graves allowed himself a single moment to breathe. The war was over. And humanity had made its point. The war had ended, but the embers still burned. Across the stars, remnants of the Dominion's once mighty empire drifted in silence, their shattered fleets reduced to nothing more than cosmic debris. Planets once adorned with towering spires of arrogance now lay in ruin, scorched beyond recognition, their surfaces marked with the signature of human vengeance. The message had been clear. The Dominion had crossed a line they could never return from. They had taken a human child. In return, Earth had taken everything. Graves sat in the dimly lit war chamber aboard the Sovereign's Wrath, staring at the silent holomap in front of him. It displayed what was left of the Dominion, a scattering of dying embers from a once raging inferno. There were no more capital cities, no more high command networks, no more fleets large enough to challenge a patrol squadron. The war had lasted only months, yet its impact would be felt for centuries. The galaxy had watched as Earth, long underestimated, had not only fought back but had annihilated one of the most powerful empires in existence. They had not conquered. They had erased. Rains entered, her expression unreadable. "Final reports are in. We've accounted for every last Dominion military installation. Their surviving vassals are either defecting or declaring neutrality. No one is rallying under their banner. It's over." Graves exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. "Casualties? Minimal on our side. They never had a chance. Their tech was advanced, their numbers overwhelming, but they had never fought an enemy like us. We don't fight for territory. We don't fight for conquest. We fight to end wars permanently. They weren't ready for that." He nodded, staring at the map. "And the ones we let go? Scattered. The refugee convoy reached independent space. We tracked them for a while. Some of their leaders wanted retribution, but most just wanted to disappear. Without a home, without a structure, they're nothing now." He nodded again, his fingers tapping against the table, his thoughts elsewhere. "Something on your mind?" Rains asked, studying him carefully. "This war wasn't just about them," Graves said quietly. "It was about us. The Dominion never expected us to retaliate because humanity has never fought a war like this before. We weren't conquerors, we weren't a species that burned planets just to make a point. And yet here we are. We did it. And the worst part is, I don't regret it." She sat across from him, folding her arms. "You shouldn't. They murdered a child. They paraded her execution like it was some grand statement. They believed we would kneel. If we hadn't retaliated, if we had allowed that moment to pass, Earth would have been their next target. This war wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. And we did what we had to do. But at what cost?" Graves muttered. "We built war machines capable of wiping out entire planetary populations in hours. We deployed weapons that even our own scientists were afraid to test. We did things that, even a year ago, would have made us monsters. I know why we did it. I know it was the only option. But what happens the next time? What happens when another enemy rises, when another empire thinks they can test us? Do we become the thing we just destroyed? Rain's gaze didn't waver. We remember why we fought in the first place. We never start wars, Graves. But when they come to us, when they take from us, we end them. Permanently. And if that means burning the stars themselves, so be it. He let the silence stretch, staring at the void beyond the viewport. Do they fear us? The whole galaxy fears us, she said. They watched the Dominion fall in months. They watched us fight without restraint, without hesitation. They know now what happens when you cross us. Graves leaned back, a grim smile touching his lips. Good. The war may have been over, but the consequences would ripple for generations. Empires would think twice before challenging Earth. Rivals who once mocked humanity now whispered their names with caution. The phrase never again had become more than just words. It had become a doctrine, a warning etched into the ruins of the Dominion, carried across the stars as a reminder. The transmission requests started soon after. Ambassadors from newly frightened galactic powers reached out, some seeking alliances, others seeking reassurances. Humanity's response was simple. We are not conquerors. But do not mistake our patience for weakness. If you threaten us, if you take from us, we will not negotiate. We will not hesitate. We will end you. There were no formal peace talks. No grand treaties. The war had spoken for itself. And as the fleets returned home, as the Sovereign's wrath made its final approach toward Earth, Graves allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The Dominion had ruled for centuries, built on the suffering of those beneath them. They had believed themselves eternal. Untouchable. But they had made one fatal mistake. They had thought humanity was weak. They would never make that mistake again. The war was over. But its lesson would never be forgotten. The stars burned with the ghosts of war. Across the void, wreckage drifted like silent gravestones, remnants of an empire that had once commanded the galaxy. The Dominion was gone, wiped from history in a campaign so swift, so precise, that it had left the entire galactic order shaken to its core. What had been a machine of conquest, a tyrannical force that had ruled for centuries, had collapsed in mere months. Not because it was weak. Not because it had been outmatched in numbers. But because it had underestimated the one species that refused to kneel. Graves stood on the command deck of the Sovereign's Wrath, staring at the final reports streaming in. Every major Dominion stronghold had fallen. Their fleets were gone, their leadership eradicated, their once loyal vassals now scrambling to declare independence before humanity turned its attention to them. What had once been an empire spanning thousands of systems had been reduced to silence. The war was over. And yet, the weight of it did not lift. Rains entered, nodding as she set a tablet on the console beside him. Final intelligence sweeps confirm no remaining military assets. Every stronghold has been neutralized, every last warlord accounted for. The last of the Dominion's territories have declared neutrality or outright surrendered. Her voice was steady, but there was something behind it. A hesitation. There's something else. Graves didn't look at her. He already knew what she was going to say. They're afraid. She nodded. Terrified. The surviving vassal states, even the ones that defected early, are sending desperate transmissions. Some want alliances. Some just want reassurance that they're not next. She hesitated. Some are talking about us like we're worse than the Dominion. He exhaled slowly. Are we? Rain's jaw tightened. The Dominion enslaved and slaughtered for centuries. They burned planets to prove a point. They executed a child and broadcast it across the stars to remind everyone of their place. She met his gaze. We didn't do that. We wiped out their military. We didn't take their civilians. We didn't claim their territory. We didn't turn this into a conquest. But we made a point, he said quietly. Damn right, we did, Rain said. And now, the galaxy knows. There won't be another Dominion. Not in our lifetimes. Not ever. The comms crackled to life. The fleet was receiving a transmission, one not from an enemy, but from Earth itself. The highest council of the United Earth government. Graves already knew what it would be. The war had ended, and now the politicians would step in, would try to shape what came next. The holofeed activated, and the face of Chancellor Eric Vasquez appeared, his expression carefully neutral. "Commander Graves," he said. "You've done what no one thought possible. The Dominion is no more." Graves remained silent. He had no interest in pleasantries. Vasquez continued, his tone shifting. "Earth is at a crossroads. The galaxy has seen what we are capable of. They fear us. Some will challenge that fear with diplomacy, others with more war. We need to decide what message we send next." Graves clenched his jaw. "The message has already been sent." The Chancellor's gaze didn't waver. "And yet, there are questions. Some within our own ranks ask if we went too far. Others ask if we didn't go far enough. We have a choice to make. Do we withdraw and return to isolation? Or do we use this opportunity to cement humanity's place at the top of the galactic order?" Rain stiffened beside him. The question was not a simple one. The war had been about retribution, about ensuring that no one ever dared harm Earth again. But in doing so, they had demonstrated something else entirely. That humanity, when provoked, could not just win a war, but end an entire civilization. The galaxy would never forget it. And now, the politicians wanted to decide what came next. Graves looked at the Chancellor. "We never fought this war to rule," he said. "We fought because they left us no choice. We fought because they took from us and thought there would be no consequences. And now we have the power to shape what comes next," Vasquez said. "This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about what we become. What we do next will define humanity's place in the galaxy for the next 1,000 years." Graves was silent. The weight of the decision pressed down on him. The war had been necessary. But what followed? That was something else entirely. He had seen what power did to civilizations. He had seen the arrogance of the Dominion, the way they had believed themselves untouchable, the way they had used their strength to impose their will on the weaker. And now, Earth stood on the precipice of that same power. Rain spoke first. "We walk away." Vasquez frowned. "Explain." "We didn't fight this war for conquest," she said. "We didn't fight it to build an empire. If we stay, if we start pushing for control, we become what we just destroyed." The Chancellor was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "Very well. But the galaxy must still understand that Earth is not to be trifled with." Graves finally looked up. "They already know." The transmission ended. The war was over. The fleet would return home. And the galaxy would be left to grapple with the aftermath. The last remnants of the Dominion would scatter, some trying to rebuild, others vanishing into obscurity. The vassal states that had once bowed to their rule would forge new paths, uncertain of what the future held. And humanity? Humanity would not rule. But it would never be ignored again. Graves turned away from the holomap, exhaling slowly. The war had left scars that would never fully heal. But for now, at least, there was silence. And silence was enough.